You're listening to Big World Network.
Phineas Frakture and the Dolomite, Episode 4. Written by Joseph Gatch. Narrated by Michael Young. Upon returning to the alley, they found the street slightly less deserted than when they had left. Few citizens ventured out for fear of the Dolomite's return. Frakture, however, knew that their nocturnal activities were at an end, at least for tonight. He had studied these creatures' habits since he was a boy. There was very little he didn't know about them. He had scoured the newspapers for every account of their movements, who they took and where they took them from. His inner sanctum, or his war room, however he thought of it, was the epitome of Dolomite research, and yet, with all his knowledge, he was no closer to finding from whence they came, or how to stop them. Now, due to the unfortunate events of the evening, Phineas suddenly felt as though he were an out-of-control locomotive, hurtling towards the answers he had sought all these years. Even in his fear, his analytic mind was piecing together every bit of data, filling in the gaps and connecting the dots. All this time, denied vengeance hovered around him like a veil, and he could not break through to find his closure. However, this was no longer the fear of the little boy, watching as his father was taken from him, that was holding him back. It was the determination of a man who could reason, who would stop at nothing to solve a problem, that drove him forward. Phineas and Abigail rechecked the doors and walls, and even the cobblestones. There was nothing to indicate where the Dolomites had gone. Phineas pulled a lockpick from his pocket belt, and began fiddling with the lock to the seamstress shop. "What are you doing?" Abigail hissed. "We're going to get caught." "You're the one who insisted on doing something, so I'm doing something." "Breaking into a business was not my idea of doing something," she retorted. Phineas heard a click and eased the door open. They had to go somewhere. "It's either here or the other shop. We'll just have a quick look around and get out of here before anyone finds us." He reached out for her and tugged Abigail inside with him. The shop interior was dusty and unused. Obviously, it hadn't been occupied for a long time. Phineas quickly turned and dragged his companion back into the alley. "That was quick," she whispered. "I thought we were going to look around." "No point," Phineas said, pointing to the door. "Our tracks are visible in the dust. If they'd come through here, there would have been much more of a disturbance. On to the next." He closed the door and made sure the lock was secure once again. "I still think that we should get some of the soldiers out here to help," Abigail said. "They're worthless. No one will help us but ourselves. Besides, you're never the one to share the glory." "Glory is no good if we're too dead to enjoy it," she muttered. The lock on the cobbler shop was much easier to open than the one on the seamstress's. They slipped inside just as a nervous watchman scurried past the alley. Not that he even ventured a look down the last place where the Dolomites had been spotted. Once inside, Phineas suddenly grabbed Abigail's sleeve, and she felt a plunging sensation as he dropped into a hole in the floor, dragging her down with him. They landed with a thud and a woof as they reached the bottom a short distance down. "You just had to take me with you, didn't you?" Abigail said as she untangled herself from him. "I didn't want you to miss the fun," Phineas replied sarcastically. He stood with a crackle of joints and stretched his aching back. "It landed on my gun." "Probably the most damage it will do tonight," she muttered. Swinging her lantern around, she spied a long trail of displaced sewage, garbage, and muck. "It looks like we go this way." They followed the trail for what seemed like miles, carefully watching for recent disturbances in the sewage where the sewers branched off. As they walked, Phineas marked the walls with his arsenal of chalk. "They've been quite busy from the looks of it," Phineas commented. "The tracks go off all through the city." "And have you noticed that we haven't seen a single rat since we've been down here?" Sewer kraken have probably eaten them all, he replied nonchalantly. Abigail paused for a moment and wondered if he was serious as she scanned the water they were traipsing through. Mrs. Popkiss seemed very rattled about the news. She was concerned about you, more than usual. Humph, replied Phineas. She's always doting over me, probably concerned that she will not get paid this week. I find that hard to believe. I think that woman would work for free if you let her. Finn, is there something you're not telling me about all of this? How do you know about these creatures? Let's just call it a personal thing and leave it at that. Abigail carried on in silence. This man, who she inexplicably would follow into the depths of the abyss, as she was doing at the moment, had more to him than it appeared. He held back so much that she was beginning to question how deep this seemingly shallow man really was. Finally, they came to what looked like the end of the trail. The pair stepped into a dry room set to the side of the sewer tunnels. What was probably once an area for city workers to rest and store equipment was now, it seemed, the entrance to the lair of the Dolonites. "There's nothing here," Abigail said as she shone her light around the room. She opened the shutter to emit full illumination and set it on the floor, giving them an unobscured look at the room. Bare walls surrounded nothing. There was no equipment, no clutter, no tracks to even hint at the presence of the beasts. "Are you sure we didn't miss a turn?" Abigail said, double-checking the trail outside. "I was thorough," proclaimed Phineas. "This is where they went. I'm sure of it." He leaned against the wall and rubbed his eyes. This is hopeless. We are never going to find him." "Have faith," Abigail responded as she came back into the room. "We just have to think about... Phineas?" The room was empty, save for the lamp on the floor. "Phineas?" Abigail ran around the room in bewilderment. "Oh, it's just like that man to go out and get lost in a room with one exit. Phineas!" There was a pounding somewhere and a muffled shout, and upon closer inspection, Abigail found that a portion of the wall opposite the entrance was slightly offset from the rest. She gave a slight push and then a hard shove. Unfortunately, the wall gave way easier than she had expected, and she went flying into the chamber beyond and straight into Phineas, who caught her in his arms. "Well, fancy meeting you here," she said as she looked into his eyes. Caught off guard, Phineas quickly released her and straightened his coat. "Yes, well, as you can see, while you were playing out there, I discovered the hidden entrance." "You fell through the door, you pompous... Same thing," Phineas cut her off. He shined his light down a corridor. "We only have one way to go now, but at least we won't be hip-deep in sewage." Somewhere up ahead, a piercing scream echoed through the brick tunnels. "At least," replied Abigail. Then with a more commanding tone, "We need to move, now!" She checked her weapon, and with Phineas in tow, ran down the corridor towards the scream.
You're listening to Big World Network.